Today's Place and Resources Scrutiny meeting. My name is Nokshirin Lacey Clark. I'm one of the two ward members for Blandford Forum and your chair today. I'll start by going through the standard operating procedure, and then we'll have a little bit more to say before we move to the main meat of the agenda. So please remember that when you use your microphone, you must push the button to switch it off after you've spoken, as the system only allows one microphone to work at a time. The red light means that your microphone is on and the camera will automatically pan towards you. If it's on green, it means somebody else's is on, and when they turn theirs off, it will then pan towards you. Please speak directly into the top of the microphone. It's very easy and tempting to turn around and look at those that you're actually addressing behind you sometimes, but it does mean your voice doesn't go through the microphone and then is not heard. Anyone that does speak, please do introduce yourself the first time you speak. Don't feel the need to do it every single time you speak, as I believe today we might be speaking multiple times. I will look at having a break midway through the meeting if necessary, but if we stick to actually scrutinising the budget itself rather than any other parts, we should finish on time if we all work together. So we'll move to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies, and I believe the only one we have is Councillor Rory Major. Item 2 is minutes. Is everyone happy for us to confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of November 2024? Anyone against that? No. Fantastic. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any declarations they need to make now? No, I believe everyone's aware of the standard declaration for setting the budget. Item 4, public participation. We have received no public participation, so that's done. Item 5, questions from councillors. No questions received. We can move on. Item 6, the budget and medium-term financial plan strategy report. So, before we start this, just a reminder that our job is to look at the budget that's been set in front of us and to decide if we can, with confidence, say, yes, this is an appropriate, balanced budget, and we can then pass it forward with a full recommendation to accept it to Cabinet. It is not our job to make the political decisions here of where the money is spent. That is something to be done at Cabinet and at full council. Our job is to scrutinise what's in front of us and to look at the pressures and the potential savings as the main part of what we're looking at, to see if we're happy with those, we understand them, and we believe that they are adequately accounted for. As part of this, we've all been members of the budget cafes and lots of other processes leading into creating this budget. It's something that's done all year long. It is not immediately presented a kind of week before this meeting. For that purpose, Aidan has very kindly agreed to not go through all of the standard setting the scene and everything that's already in the paper that we've already heard before. It is assumed we've all read the paper and are aware of it. Instead, I'm trying something slightly new, and Aidan and Sean have very kindly agreed to do a set of comparisons for the last 3 years, what we budgeted and what we actually spent, what we budgeted, what we actually spent, to show how accurate and how improving our ability to budget and anticipate is. But that must be taken with a level of kind of wariness, as obviously what we budgeted for does not always include those in-year big changes where one thing's moved from a service to another. So please do not worry if you see an overspend as such, because quite often there's a really good reason behind that, which I'm sure Aidan will talk to as he does it. Rather than asking all non-members to rush all of their questions and comments at the very start of the item, as is the general way we do this, I'm going to run this as long as time permits as more of a anybody can speak after we've gone to that appendix item. I won't be trying to say you must be not a member to speak first or you must only be a member to speak then. And please do try to stay away from the political shenanigans, because that's really not what we're here for, and we'll drag the meeting out, as will questions on what a service covers as such, and going into those sort of details. So without any further ado, I will pass over to Sean, who is going to be presenting the first slide. And Sean, thank you so much.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. So I'm Sean Creamer, the Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial and Deputy Section 151 Officer. I'm just about to share on screen the aforementioned document as described by the chair, which, as has just been described, sets out the original budget that was set for the year. So this any column that which you see saying original budget is referring to the original budget as set in the February of the year. And then what's been asked to compare that against is the actual spend at the end of that year. So i.e. what happened about 13 months later. And as was outlined by the chair, the original budget doesn't move during the year. So for example, where a service has been moved from one department to another. So one of the recent examples which people will probably remember and is relevant to this committee is the move of libraries, customer and culture services from place into corporate, for example, is one of those such movements which causes what looks like a variance. So on screen, you can see the original budget for 22-23, 23-24. You can then see the 24-25 original budget, the Q2 forecast. So these are the figures which were presented to Audit and Governance on Monday night this week. And you can then see the 25-26 budget proposals that are in front of you and to be scrutinised today. And then the final column is the movement from the 22-23 budget against that 25-26 budget. And then the last thing at the very bottom of this, perhaps where we start asking questions, is what was the total budget for the council, and then for place and then corporate, what percentage did they make up of the overall council budget, which perhaps allows for some kind of trend analysis as to how big a slice of the overall cake was each directorate over time. I think that's as much as I've got for introductory, so I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sean. So I don't know if you want to just scroll down slowly so people can have a look at this. So you can see how accurate our budgeting is, and how since we created the council, it's got more and more accurate over the years. So we can see there is one there that I would just like to highlight as a question, as an example question, is the highways one there. We were obviously budgeting for it to be, $2.5 million for one of the year, and then it actually came in as bringing money in. Could we have a kind of a bit of an explanation as to why that one was so different?
Yeah, hi. So Sean again, and so in some of the years, what we have at the end of the year, so highways contains highways activity, street lighting, PFI contracts, and then also car parking revenues also in there. One of the major movements that we see each year is around the street lighting PFI contract. It's a significant contract. It's we've got some feedback. Okay, yeah, that seems to have stopped. And so the PFI contract that comes in at the end of the year is a large reconciliation exercise, and as a result, we see some fluctuation. I think, as is mentioned in the main MTFP document, whilst the highways line shows a net budget of £2.5 million, I think there's about £30 to £40 million, depending on which year you look at, of kind of major spend and major income that comes through there. So whilst it looks like a significant movement on a net budget of £2.5 million, those variances are actually based on a kind of gross spend in the region of kind of 60 to 80 million.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on the table in front of us, which is showing the budgeted to the actual? Are we happy that it kind of very well illustrates the point of the kind of level of accuracy we get to with our budgeting? Oh, Ray, please go for it.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan, Ward Member for St Leonards and St Ives, and obviously Vice Chairman of Scrutiny. Sean, I'd like to ask, if possible, if I look at the 2022-2023 budget numbers, obviously the biggest effect that had on those budgets was the pandemic. Can you give us any indication, if not, can you come back to us with it, on the effects that the pandemic had on us? Because when I look at the reduction in highways, I know the team from highways did a fantastic job going out there, delivering food packages, etc. For the new members, they won't know that this has happened, so I'm highlighting it for the benefit of new members, but that sort of thing does have an effect, and I've yet to see anywhere just exactly what the pandemic actually cost us in the end, But again, you might want to come back to us when you've had time to look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think the chair seems to be indicating that we'll follow up in writing, just because that's looking backwards, and I think you want us to focus on 25, 26. So we'll follow up in writing.
Councillor Tuck, please come in.
Councillor Tuck, Old Holt and Cranbourne Ward. There's a number of departments that charge fees for their services, particularly planning. What would be quite nice is to get, for example, planning to be not a cost to the council, so that it should be fully funded by developers, which looks at fees and charges for that. And also pre-planning advice on majors. There's a number of councils more or less insist that developers take on pre-planning advice or pre-application advice for major developments. Are we able to sell this far more to developers in terms of the benefits they get from proper pre-application advice? And when we're looking at fees and charges, should we not be looking to make planning a cost-neutral service? Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Do you want that answer now, or do you want to wait till we get to the kind of planning area on there? I'm very happy to, I believe Shane is here, or someone appropriate. Yep. Would you like it now?
If possible, otherwise if it's more appropriate and comes in with something else, I'll leave it to your judgment. But it'd be quite nice to get an answer. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, yeah, do you want to come on in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Mike Garrity, the new Corporate Director for Planning. Thank you, Councillor, took those questions. I think they're both perfectly valid questions that I would share your desire to do that. If I turn firstly to the issue of the planning fees, we are still in a situation where all planning fees are covered by statutorily set national fees. So we have to work within that regime. We have got the commitment now that planning fees will be going up as from the 1st of April. We have to work through what the implications of all of that are. Now, there is likely to be an improvement in terms of meeting our costs of delivering the service, but I have to say it's a long way from getting to the point where all of the costs of planning could ever be met by that, because if you think about it, it's not just dealing with the planning applications, it's all of the internal expert consultees that we have who might comment on those planning applications, all of their time and cost, our own legal services. So to get to a point where all of the costs are covered, I think we're still going to be some way short of that. And at the current time, we're not in control of that. That is a government agenda. There is some discussion about potentially looking at local fee setting, but I think that would require primary legislation. And as yet, we're not in that ball game. As far as the pre-application charging, we do our utmost to actually really push that very firmly. So we are very good at doing that, and we do make it very clear to developers that we will give them very limited access to advice or anything like that unless they go through our pre-application service. And that's been actually very productive in bringing in extra income to us. So that is a line we are certainly very much pushing. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So happy that's agreement. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just an actual question. Obviously, this is my first meeting on place scrutiny. Sorry, Councillor O'Leary, a little more on Preston Ward in Weymouth. I've served on people in health scrutiny in the past. It's my understanding that scrutiny is looking at things that have already taken place. This is obviously a new budget. Just for clarity, I'm unsure how we're meant to scrutinise a budget going forward. I don't understand. I mean, this has been to overview already, which obviously look at the future. Scrutiny is effectively looking at the past. It was just raised in regards to we have to look at this budget. Can you just clarify what our actual role is in scrutinising something that's not taken place yet?
Absolutely, Councillor. I think it's an oddity of the legal system for scrutinising budgets. Jonathan Mayer, would you like to come in on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Jonathan Mayer, Monitoring Officer. So this is an exception to the usual position, and it's exactly as Councillor O'Leary described it, that usually as a scrutiny committee, you're looking backwards and scrutinising decisions that have already been made and how those have been implemented. This is an exception, whereas a scrutiny committee, you look ahead and you scrutinise a budget that is going to be proposed to the Cabinet and then at full council. So it is slightly unusual. It's not the way you would usually do things, but it's the way we usually do the budget. It's no different this year than in previous years.
Thank you very much. In which case, we'll start moving towards the meat of the agenda. So obviously, we are only scrutinising the place and resources-based side of things. The rest of it was done yesterday. I will come very shortly, if that's okay. And so we have got to just quickly cover Appendix 1D as kind of the first of the appendixes that we're going to be looking at the pressures and potential savings in, because that is the adults, service and housing, which does have a level of place and resources as well as the people and health. Part was covered yesterday and part will be today. Councillor Brenton, did you want to ask a question now?
Okay. Can we go back to this slide, the budget slide that was up on the screen? And there's something I'd like to just query, just for an explanation. Except you can't get it up there while I'm talking, I suppose. Okay. It's under property and assets, in that it seems to have changed from quite a low expenditure, 92, 93, suddenly massive. Where are we? But 2, 3 up from the bottom, assets and property. Right. I can see that in 22, 23, we spent more than we expected, fair enough. But 23, 24, we went a little bit, whoops. Is this because we purchased something? Or I mean, I know there's a lot of repairs to be done, but 11 million seems quite a lot. Whatever.
Yeah, so hi, Sean again. So the line highlighted on screen, and members that are at Cabinet meetings and audit and governance, when we bring the budget monitoring reports, will probably be familiar with the compliance activity that was required. So there's a lot of narrative in the budget monitoring reports which covers off the level of work that's been required to be done to maintain essentially health and safety compliance, building safety, etc. on our estate. And so during 23-24, there was a significant, I suppose, what might say a catch-up process that was going on, which incurred additional expenditure. And then there's that's also a continued theme, which is featured in the 24-25 budget monitoring. And you see an uplift in the 25-26 budget, recognising as we get to a more even keel and an ongoing maintenance programme, what that looks like to maintain the kind of size and scale of assets that Dorset Council has. And some of that spike in 23-24, again, has been described as we've converged as local authorities, lots of different estates, different assets and estates from different, the predecessor authorities, different conditions. So just some time kind of playing catch up, really, as was mentioned in the opening question, a pandemic in the middle of all that as well. So.
Thank you so much. So I take it you're happy with that answer and the fact it's changed since?
I'm happy with the response, but I just wanted it pointed out that Dorset Council has had some issues with assets and property, and if we've now repaired them, that's good.
Yes, I think Dorset Council has fixed a lot of potential issues, which is very good. So we'll now move to, so those that are using the public document packets, page 56, I believe, or around that page 55, Appendix 1D for adult services and housing. So on there, it lists out quite easily for us the pressures and the potential savings in there. Before I jump in with anything, has anyone got any questions on this particular part of the appendix? Councillor Bryant?
Thank you, Chairman. One of my questions that would have come up later on, but it's probably more, it's probably better to sort of ask the question now. For about the last 6 years, we've been trying to discuss the cost of the green minibus fleet, which falls into obviously the area of place, but the services within adult services. And I just wondered, has anything been done in the budget, because I can't see it, where we move the cost of the adult services across? because I do believe that should belong in adult services and not in the transport side. Thank you.
And the chair previously asked for yes/no answers, and the answer to that question is no. There has not been a change.
Thank you very much. And obviously, the yes/no isn't you have to stick to that. It's like if it's a yes/no question, it does help me. It helps massively. But yes, no, it hasn't in there. It's something that's not been in there. That's fine. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Steve Mercer for Blackmore Vale Ward. At the Budget Cafe, Aidan, I asked you for some detail. Thank you. I spent hours reading this detail last night. But they say be careful what you wish for, isn't it? Could I just ask a few questions about that Appendix D and particularly the savings that come out? So I assume those savings are annualised, are they?
Yes, good afternoon. Aidan Dunn, Exec Director for Corporate Development. So the vast majority of savings are full year effect, but if they can only be implemented partway through the year, we'll put in a part year effect this year and take the full year effect next year. So we try to, by setting the budget at this stage, as in a few months ahead of the new financial year, give us a bit of time to be able to implement.
Right, so essentially what you're saying is that you should achieve those savings in 25-26. It's not a case that that's an annual figure and which assumes you do everything on the 1st of January, which obviously is not going to happen. The thing that strikes me with those savings that come out of process changes and initiatives is your ability to actually suck the cost out of those changes. That does look ambitious to me. And I know children's services isn't what this committee is about, but I remember David Taylor asked a good question last year. He asks others, but this one was one of his best ones. When the children in care numbers went down 18%, he asked the question, have the costs gone with it? And he got the answer, no, the costs remain flat. So you will have to work, in my opinion, very hard to take those savings out of those processes. In some of the salary savings, I wondered whether there was a double counting in there, if the jobs were left uncovered last year, because you're forecasting this year full year savings, but some of that saving might have been achieved last year. And if I go back to that Gantt chart about what the transformation plan looks like, it's very front-end loaded with costs and very back-end loaded with savings. Nobody wants to see Dorset Council fail, but I think you're going to have to work very hard to get some of those savings out of those initiatives.
Thank you. That's a very helpful comment, and it's an accurate observation. I think if I could just say one thing, this is a really tough and challenging budget. I think what we've seen, the paper lays out that the new government's policy is to shift funding away from rural authorities to other areas. So we're having less and less funding from government, our increase is less than previously, and we anticipate that this will go on for a number of years yet. So this budget is tough. There's significant impact on staffing, as you say, and it's always, we have to be sensitive and delicate, and it does take time to adjust the size and scale of the organisation. It's a tough budget, and it will continue to be tough over a number of years yet as well. From a national perspective, indeed, that translates into Dorset Council. So I recognise what you're describing in terms of the risk and the challenge. I think it's a collective challenge, and I feel it heavy on my shoulders. What you're seeing in the budget through here is there's quite a few references to contingency. So we have set aside quite a significant contingency in case we're not able to deliver in year, or to anticipate some of those sort of unforeseen pressures. So in setting this budget, we're trying to strike the balance between ambition, deliverability, setting aside contingency to manage some of the risk, but recognition that this is a tough budget and it's going to get tougher in future years for factors outside our control, and that we're having to respond to the national economic climate, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Coming on from what Councillor Mercer said in regards to savings, I've been a councillor for 6 years now. I think every budget I think I've ever been put forward to me has been a difficult and challenging, and this is the most challenging one yet. I think last year's savings were estimated to be around £10 million. As far as I'm aware, how much? £8.6 million or whatever. And as far as I'm aware, none of those savings were met. The savings this year are predicted to be around £40 million. If you couldn't deliver milk last year, why are you going to deliver me cheese this year? How are you going to manage that? If you couldn't deliver that amount last year, how are you going to deliver an incredibly larger amount in tougher circumstances this year? That's the question I want to know.
Thank you, Councillor. I think there's two points slightly being conflated there. So the £10 million or the 8.6 is the Our Future Council savings in last one, which this year is 10 million, and we'll come to that separately. That is Appendix 1H, so we'll get to that. But the other 30 million that's in here, I believe that's the point. Could you talk on how much of the other savings we were successful with last year?
Thank you. And I'll sort of play back big picture over the 5 years. We talk about 125 million, I think 125-ish million of savings since we're set up as a council. And when we talk about savings, some of that's cost avoidance, some of that is genuine savings and efficiencies, all of which has been reinvested in the services. For this current financial year, off the top of my head, so I've got so many financial years going on. I think the budget that we set for this current financial year had savings targets of around about, we had about 23 million and then OFC on top of that. I think that's what we're saying. So we have been able to achieve a whole range of other savings and efficiencies. It's the Our Future Council Transformation Programme that we haven't been able to achieve yet, and we'll look at later on in the agenda.
On the housing one, I might be being silly, and I think it was referred to yesterday, but I can't spot in there where the income is that we're putting aside, the 40% of the double council tax on second homes. Whereabouts is that in the budget? 'Cause I couldn't spot it separately.
Okay, if I could comment on that, and I would just sort of set the scene for those who weren't watching yesterday. So when full council approved the budget in February this current financial year, so February 2024, a motion was put forward and agreed by council that 40% of the additional funding from second homes council tax would be set aside to fund housing, be ring-fenced to fund housing in future budgets. So our estimate within these numbers is that for next financial year, by having 100% premium on second homes, we'll raise about an extra £8 million for through council tax. And in line with that budget amendment for full council, that would mean about 40%, 3.2 million should be ring-fenced and spent on housing. What we've got in the budget proposals, in particular related to the capital programme, there's around about 1.8 million of additional funding going in for houses, in particular for to support those in temporary accommodation, to avoid bed and breakfast. So there's a new 1.8 million going into the capital programme, and we've also been increasing the staffing in housing specifically as well as part of the growth of the organisation. One of the points from yesterday's committee was that this is a bit obscure. It's not drawn out clearly enough in the papers. So we're taking an action from yesterday's committee to highlight that in the paper that goes to Cabinet, to be explicit, to make the link between the 3.2 and the amendment.
Thank you for that. I will just, one thing on that is I'm slightly concerned that it's only 1.8 million going to capital, because the extract from full council, the agreement is very specific on what that money can be used for. It doesn't, I don't think it can just be used on staffing. It has to be used on very specific ways that are, listed and detailed very heavily. So if that's going to Cabinet, rather than us discussing it now, we'll wait for that to be drawn out and then put in Cabinet to be discussed then. Is that helpful? So I see no point in us going through that at this point.
Helpful, yes, agreed.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have some reassurance that will be drawn out for Cabinet. Does anyone else have any questions on the housing one? As I say, it is just the place and resources side to it we're looking at. No? Fantastic. Then we will move to, I assume, page 60. Appendix 1E is the next one, which is quite a fun one for us to look at, which is corporate development, legal and democratic services. And we have those there for the freshers and the savings. Does anyone have any questions on those? No, everyone's very happy with it, thinks it's very reasonable. Perfect. In that case, we can move to Appendix 1F. Appendix 1F is place summary of movements and all of them on there. Now this, I'm assuming, is going to be the main meat of this meeting. Who would like to open up on questions about either the pressures or the potential savings over the Place Directorate as a whole? If Councillor Took.
Thank you. There's been a lot of pressure on staffing costs. As I understand it, we are not staffed to complement, so there are vacancies around. A couple of questions. One, have those vacancies reduced the level of service we can provide? And what would be the cost implication of staffing to complement on these figures, or are they taken into account currently?
Fantastic question. I love it. I'm going to look over at who I'm assuming Jan's answering it, or not? No? Yep.
I'm happy to attempt an answer to the question. So I'm Jan Britton, I'm the Executive Director for Place, and you are quite correct, we're holding a number of vacancies across the Place Directorate. One of the main reasons for that is that our budget actually includes a vacancy factor. So the budget is based on the assumption that we never really achieve 100% employment, that when staff turnover occurs, we hold a vacancy to achieve a saving every year. And I think the annual vacancy factor in the Place budget is a little over £1 million. So in a sense, my staffing budget is £1 million less than I would need if I was operating at 100% staffing capacity. So I always have to meet a target for turnover. On top of that, we are holding posts vacant for longer in recognition of the fact that the direction of travel for the council's budget as a whole does mean that we're heading in a direction of being a smaller organisation, and we need to find ways to continue delivering services with fewer members of staff over the medium term. So where vacancies are occurring, we're asking ourselves in every instance, do we replace that vacancy like for like? Do we hold that vacancy until we know more about what we might need for the future? Or indeed, do we need something different because business change means that a post we might have appointed 3 or 4 years ago is no longer what we need going forward? Now, at this point in time, we are meeting all of the service delivery standards that the council sets for us to meet. But it is the case that as we go forward, if we continue to reduce staffing numbers, which believe is the direction for the travel for the council, we may well be in some areas coming back to the council and asking for a discussion about what service standards are appropriate for the future. But as we sit here today, I'm confident that the Place Directorate meets the service standards that are set for us to meet across the Directorate.
Thank you. That's comforting that we're meeting the standards, as long as those standards are high standards. One of the normal responses to reducing staffing is automation. Traditionally, something's gone in. And artificial intelligence might come into the mix here as well. But in order to use tech to drive forward savings and changes in process and procedure and getting the results effectively right, there's generally needs to be a significant investment in software and to a degree hardware. So is that something that we would be looking at in the next year or more? And how can we effectively do that? And of course, the cost of these things can be in the millions. Yeah, significant software for an organisation this size is not cheap, as I'm sure everyone's aware. So there could be capital costs of improving our IT and our tech and our processes. How do those get reflected in a budget for 1 year? Or do they?
Thank you, Chair. I may ask my colleague Aidan Dunn to comment on the wider approach on the budget, but Councillor Took highlights exactly what I mean when I say that when a vacancy becomes open, we look at whether that is still the post we need to fill or whether we need something different for the future. And while I completely agree that some software packages that local government uses are extremely expensive, there are also plenty of examples out there at the moment where artificial intelligence, for example, is bringing really quite significant efficiency savings at quite low cost. So the best example in place that I've discussed in recent days, for example, is in analysing large numbers of responses to a public consultation, where artificial intelligence engines that are readily available and relatively cheap to use can do the work that in the past would have taken a human engine a great deal more time. So not every innovation needs a large capital investment to make it viable. And that is exactly what we're doing, looking across our business and saying, where are those changes? Where can we apply those changes to make the sort of savings that we need to make? But in terms of how that's dealt with across the whole of the council's budget for investment, Chair, if I may, Mr. Dunn may be better placed to respond.
So, Chair, I'll take a steer from you. I'm happy to answer the question, but it really fits into the heart of the Our Future Council, which I know you'd said you'd like to discuss a bit later. So the answer is, I can give an answer, but would you rather I did it a bit later? Okay.
If there's a better answer to my question coming later within a greater context, then that would be good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Councillor O'Leary.
My question was in a similar vein about AI and mechanisation, as it were, so I'm happy to wait until same appendix.
Fantastic, thank you. I think a slight bit of clarity is, I think what part of the question is that the funds for transformation aren't done by service, are they? It's central and applied for. And I think that covers a lot of it for that sort of thing. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Needless to say, most of my attention has been on Appendix 1F for obvious reasons, know my history. The bit that shows me greatest concern is the heading Place Pressures, because this is really where we get down to the nitty-gritty. And if I look at the number one, which is Dorset Travel Growth, which is 2.3 million, I'm led to believe that figure started off at about 5 million, and we had to drive it down. My concern is the 2.3 million achievable? But on top of that, I've got to say exceptional work has been done on the special educational needs transport. Fantastic work. Can't fault it at all. What plans do we have, not just to continue with this work, but to further reorganise, to reduce, or at least maintain the costs? When I had the portfolio, we looked at using our own transport rather than buying in outside suppliers, including taxis and buses. Can I get confirmation that that work is still ongoing? Because obviously it's very important that where we have these pressures, we don't allow it to drift too far into the new financial year before we've taken the necessary actions to get the numbers under control.
Thank you. I think Jan's going to speak on that, and may pass over to Jack as well.
I think I can answer the question, Chair. Thank you. the original figure in that box was indeed well over £5 million, but it's not the case that we've forced that figure down. The figure has in fact come down through some of the very work that you've just described, Councillor Bryan, the excellent work that's been done recently on reprocuring travel contracts, meaning that the original forecast, which was based on previous experience, the recent reprocurements of those contracts have come in much more competitively than we've had in the past. And although there continues to be pressure on the Dorset travel budget, that pressure is a lot less than we first forecast it might be. So we haven't had to go through a sort of value reduction, forcing the budget down exercise. That has come as a pleasant surprise to us through reprocurement. In fact, not a surprise. That's to say it's a surprise is to undermine the excellent work done by the staff team. The good work done on reprocuring those contracts means that the rate of growth is a lot slower than it might otherwise have been. And we do indeed continue to work very hard looking at all of the factors that affect the travel budget. So that's things such as route optimisation, looking at who the suppliers might be, looking at our own vehicle fleet, and making sure that we're using all of those different tools to keep the budget as accurate and as much under control as we can, because, as you know, Councillor Bryan, the Dorset travel budget isn't driven by any one factor. It's driven by a number of factors that interrelate with each other. And to get this sort of result, we have to manage the whole basket of those factors in real time. And that is indeed what the team do to get this sort of outcome.
Thank you, Jan. I absolutely agree with everything you've said, which won't come as any great surprise. But I still have a concern, and my concern is the only way we will succeed if we're united in what we're trying to do. And if we look at the SEN budget, the transport budget, then that's absolutely essential that we work very closely with Children's Services, because they deal with the demand side. So it's absolutely imperative. And again, I go back, fantastic work done over the last couple of years in getting these numbers under control. I can remember the horror in this chamber when I came back and said I needed more money for transport. Aidan looked at me in disbelief at that stage. He looks a bit more relaxed now because the numbers are coming in where they should be. But I do think it's important, if we can, to make sure we have that ongoing relationship between the departments, because this is a joint exercise to maintain. It's such a big number. It's the biggest on that sheet. So it's important that we concentrate on the big numbers. I'll get to some of the smaller numbers if the chairman will give me grace on this later on.
Councillor Bear.
Thank you, Chairman. Derek Bear, dual member Ward 4 Shaftesbury. And this is quite weird, really, because never using a car park in my life, I'd like to talk about the car parking issues. As we all know, this is a really rural county, and we look at it across the board and say, yeah, rurality, and this is how we are. But I would suggest that across the county, the needs are very, very different. So if I was going out with Jack for a meal in Dorchester or Weymouth in the evening to pay £2.50 to park my car, no sweat, that's fine, it's less than a pint of beer. However, over the years, and you've been involved with this too, in our small rural towns, we've done an awful lot of work to regenerate the town centres by repopulating above the shops with low-income families, and I don't mean that in any poor way, because I was one. So we built car parks to go with it, so that those properties were populated, the people had work, the crime rates went down, council tax came in, and to go with that, where people didn't have gardens or drives or whatever, narrow streets, we provided car parks. So those people would get home at night, park the car overnight, and go off in the morning. The suggestion now that we charge £17.50 a week on people on very low incomes to park their cars overnight is a bit steep. And I'd like to suggest, please, that we don't look at all of our car parks exactly the same, but we actually look at why they were built, what the purpose was, and not just for shoppers during the day, but to service the nightlife or the stability and crime reduction in the town centres. The amount of money coming in is very little, but the difference it makes to people who live in those towns is quite significant. And I'd hate to see people moving out of towns for something quite as simple as a £2.50 charge a night to pay. And I sincerely ask that be looked at, please.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. And actually, rather than we all vigorously agree with each other, I had a feeling this might come up as one of the recommendations from the committee, as that was something we had concerns about the negative impact it would have on the economy and loss of business rates and other things as a result. Is there anyone that feels differently, or can we just park that one as it's probably going to be one of the recommendations that come from us? Or does anybody massively disagree with that? Do you disagree with it?
No, but I need to make a comment on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Councillor Bear, I totally agree with what you're saying. One of my biggest concerns about the nighttime charges, and bearing in mind I tried to bring them in, and it got voted against at a previous council meeting. I do worry not just the effect it's going to have on the people that can least afford it, but also on the nighttime economy, because a lot of people will drive into Dorchester, Weymouth, Blandford for the nighttime economy. So I absolutely agree with the comment you've passed, but just like to add that to it with a little bit more strength, that it will affect the nighttime economy as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I tried to avoid us enthusiastically agreeing with each other, though, because I think it's very clear, and I think Councillor Andrews understands what we're saying there. Councillor Lee, did you want to add to it?
No, in that case, no. Obviously, I am opposed to nighttime park.
Fantastic. Please remove your first name, sorry. Fantastic. Councillor Jack, come on in.
Thank you, Chair. One of the savings I've noticed, and I was a bit surprised to see it, to be honest, because I think going forward we'll be working collaboratively with Wiltshire and Somerset, was the restriction of use on our HRCs. Now, I have a particular... Sorry, I'm the ward member for Shaftesbury, by the way, along with Derek. I have a particular interest in this because Shaftesbury sits right on the Wiltshire border, and although there are many that live on the outside of the town, they're very much part of the town, and they're not ratepayers, and I understand we're not democratically accountable for them. But this is going to cause quite an issue for them, because if they can't use Shaftesbury, the nearest sites are Warminster, which is 14 miles away, and Salisbury, which is 22 miles away. It's probably a 2-minute drive for most people if they live in Donhead or Semley, which is just outside Dorset on the Wiltshire borders. My ask would be, can this be reviewed in some way? Because we have to look at what Wiltshire Council also does for us, and I don't really want to get stuck in a tit-for-tat fight with Wiltshire. Shaftesbury is reliant on Wiltshire for services such as the Salisbury Reds, which is the buses. Many of our residents work in Salisbury, and they rely heavily on that. So I would imagine Wiltshire subsidise that very heavily. In fact, I think they subsidise it completely. I don't think we put anything into it at all. And it benefits our residents enormously. So perhaps we could have a little look at what those restrictions might be on the HRCs, because I'd imagine they're probably talking mostly about Shaftesbury and Sherborne. What restrictions did you have in mind for the HRCs? Because it's really bothering me that this is one of the proposed savings.
Gemma Clinton, Corporate Director for Waste Reduction and Green Space. So we've been speaking very closely with Wiltshire and Somerset councils, and Wiltshire already exclude us from their household recycling centres, and Somerset will be doing the same as well. And that all comes down to budget restrictions that every council are facing. So we've done some recent site user surveys, and the amount of cross-border residents coming into Sherborne and Shaftesbury from outside of Dorset is costing us that £60,000. And because we need to find savings within the budget, that is one way we're looking to make savings. What we would like to propose, and subject to technology and working with our contractor, is rather than outright banning those residents, we would like to charge them. So it still gives residents the option to come and use our services, But rather than Dorset Council subsidising that, they need to pay for it themselves.
What sort of charges are we talking? Because sometimes, would it be like a day rate or would it be per trip?
The standard model that other councils that do this is a per visit charge of about £10.
Okay. As I say, I think it is also important to note what Wiltshire does for us as a council, and especially in North Dorset. They put on rather a lot of travel for our residents, and I really don't want this to turn into a tit-for-tat sort of argument where they might look at withdrawing funding because we're not prepared to help those who live right on our border. It's really frustrating me, actually. But thank you for the response.
Thank you. I've got three other people that want to come in on this point. So I've got Councillor Beer is first, then I've got Councillor O'Leary, then I've got Councillor Took. The three I've got. Have I missed anybody? No, Councillor Beer.
If I can support Jack in what he said, we've got a really unique situation. Most of the people in Shaftesbury or in the surrounding area, in the SP7 area, which is critical, they come to us for the doctors, the hospital, the dentist, the hair, the waste centre. Now, where our waste centre is situated is within metres of Wiltshire. So people who are living within Shaftesbury, who live in the town of Shaftesbury, actually are paying their rates to Wiltshire. Now, to go to people who live in Shaftesbury, who live just round the corner by the members' room, that they've got to pay to come to a tip when they psychologically think and believe they live in Shaftesbury. This leaked. Goodness knows it didn't leak from us. This has leaked, and people are saying, for goodness sake, they're not interpreting they've got to go and pay, but the initial response, as you would expect from people, is, so you expect me to burn up those miles and go all that you're not doing much to help our economy. So the thought that Jack and I had was perhaps we'd be decent enough, bearing in mind how much Wiltshire does support Shaftesbury in every way, with the bus services and all sorts. They're brilliant, and they never argue, they just help us. That we say people who live in SP7, which is Shaftesbury, could have access to the tip. It's not unreasonable because they live in the same flipping road. So I believe that's a reasonable request.
So I have got two more people to speak, but I can feel another kind of recommendation going forward that we ask Cabinet to consider the nuances around that decision. But I think that's what we're coming forward. So I'm now going to move to Councillor O'Leary and then Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 64, it mentions the Tier 3 parking extension. Would this be the time for me to ask a question around that, or would you like me to wait to another?
Councillor Took, was yours about the same point of the parking access to tips? It was. Sorry, Councillor Took. So I was using the microphone then. Councillor Took's going to come in now.
Thanks. As I introduced myself before, I'm councillor for Cranbourne and Alderholt, and we have locally what we call the Summerley tip, okay, which is used by people in Verwood, Alderholt, Ferndown, and other areas. Wimborne as well go to it because the Wimborne tip is not really fit for purpose at the moment. It's in Hampshire, and we pay Hampshire for the privilege of using it for Dorset residents. And that works quite well at the moment. I would hate to see any idea in this that Summerley tip in Hampshire will be unavailable to residents. Over 50% of the users of that tip are residents of Dorset, from the latest figures I saw. So we need to make sure that we have access to the tip in Hampshire for residents of Dorset. But I think that ties in with the idea that quid pro quo. So it works the same that if there's a tip in Dorset that neighbouring residents can use more easily, there should be a similar scheme. And I say Dorset Council pay for that because Dorset Council can't provide an acceptable tip anywhere close in East Dorset. So I think it's only fair that these things continue. Thank you.
So I'm taking from this a bit of a recommendation that's coming out that because this is budget rather than policy, and so budget-wise, we look at the ramifications of stopping people that believe they are residents not being able to use something very close to them without a charge. We ask the Cabinet to consider the ramifications of that and also to try to ensure the continuation of providing those tips elsewhere. Yeah? Does anyone have an issue with that being a recommendation, or can I put that on the list? Brilliant. Then I'm going to move to Councillor O'Leary to start the next point.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On the item of Tier 3 extension of the car parks, one in Weymouth, one in Lyme Regis, and is it West Bay? Yeah, West Bay. It's my understanding that when this was brought to scrutiny last time, the description of the results of the trial was that it was had no significant impact. I think it was something along those lines. Look, I'm fully in support of reducing car parking charges in Weymouth. I was hoping they would be reversed as promised. What I want to know is, if that was the result of the scrutiny last time of this trial, why is it being continued? And to me, for a trial to go on this long, as opposed to a direct policy change, seems slightly odd. Why are we instituting another trial in a budget after we've already had a trial take place?
Thank you, Councillor. That was one of the ones I was going to bring up, especially as it might even pay for them not charging at night. Is that Jan taking that, Matt taking that, Jack taking that? Because Jan's taking it.
So I think that the proposal is to hold the charges at the level they were for the pilot. I don't think it says extend the pilot. It says to hold the charges at the level they were for the pilot. So I think we're... I'm sorry, can you give me the reference, Councillor O'Leary? Page 64, Tier 3 car parking charges, pilot held at 24-25 level. 3 above that. 3 above that, to apologise. Tier 3 extension, continue winter tariff and 3 Tier 3 car parks. Fine. I mean, that is the proposition. It is to continue the charges at that lower level.
Those 3 car parks.
For those 3 car parks.
Fantastic. Sorry, I think the question was, when we looked at the validity of the pilot and success of it, it was no discernible impact was created by it. And I think the question is, why are we continuing the trial? I think that was what the question is, and it states there that it's continuing the tariff pilot. So if we could just, I think that was the question. Oh, and Councillor Leary might want to add to that.
I just want to clarify, I'm not against the trial. I would like to see the actual reduction in car parking charges set in stone and expanded on, as opposed to being another year of a pilot. What I want to know is, though, based on the fact that it was described as not having a meaningful impact at a previous scrutiny meeting, why it's being continued, and also why is it continued to be a pilot as opposed to a change in policy?
Excellent, thank you. Jan, John? John.
Thank you, Councillor John Andrews for Sherborne East and Cabinet Member for Place Services, purely because we want to continue those lower charges in those 3 car parks as per the trial last year. That's why it's being held, and that's the view of the Cabinet members.
So that it's a purely political decision, not an officer recommended one. And that's not a problem, not arguing that, but that's fine. That's a discussion to have at Cabinet and at full council, not here, is the feeling I'm getting. John?
Yeah, that is a decision by Cabinet, but it is for the benefit of the people that want to park a little bit more reasonably in those 3 car parks.
Councillor Leary, and then I will move on.
Sorry, I just want to ask, why is it an extension of a pilot as opposed to those car parking charges in those car parks just being changed permanently?
Because it's a Cabinet position to continue with the trial, is what we've been told. And I think that's a Cabinet and full council question. So we'll leave it there and not comment on the facts of anything else. We have, are you trying to speak as well? Okay, I have 2 more. So Craig first, and then I've got Ray. I think both on these points.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Craig Monks, Bedminster Ward. I'll defer to my colleague because I think Councillor Leary has pretty much covered most of my points, actually. And just to clarify for Councillor Leary, West Bay is in West Dorset.
Yeah, just for a bit of clarity, if we can, because you're increasing other area Tier 3s, from what I can see, but what we're looking at now is a £200,000 reduction in revenue to repair the roads, plus 85,000, which is about 3-4 lines further down, which is Tier 3 car parking charges held at 24-25 level. So the total cost is 285,000. I got to ask the question, when we originally did this review, and it's perfectly within the Cabinet's right to change it, not querying that, but when we did this, we were under tremendous pressure to try and reduce the amount of cars that were coming into the car park under the climate change agenda. We seem to have a bit of a hiccup on that at the moment, and I'm going to ask for some clarity either today or at Cabinet, because churn was the idea, so that we can get more car parking spaces for people. That worked well. I'm a little bit concerned that we're now encouraging people to use their cars rather than discouraging them, which will actually have an effect on the carbon emissions. Sorry, Louis, mentioning carbon emissions. The carbon emissions in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just refer to my previous answer.
Thank you, John. No worries. In which case, I'm going to take it slightly further then, and I want some help understanding the decision. Why Tier 1 and Tier 2 are going up by CPI backdated to 2023, but we're not doing that in the rest of Tier 3s and specifically the trial car parks. Is that just because we want... Well, I won't repeat some of the question.
Thank you, Chair. It's purely a decision by Cabinet that we increased, instead of taking out by what we could have taken out by, as you remember, inflation was 11%. There was a recommendation not to do that, but we actually brought it down to where it is now. So yeah, so that was a decision made, and as we all know, costs have increased. Costs are going to increase for all of our staff and our maintenance on the car parks, etc., and our revenue spend in highways. So, and highways, as you know, anything that's made in car parks over and above what it costs to administer the car parks is spent in the revenue budget in highways.
Thank you. So that is, again, this was a portfolio holder or Cabinet choice to do it and those are not Tier 3. Okay, that's fine then. I won't ask officers about that decision and I'll move that to a Cabinet meeting. No, Councillor Lewis leaving it there. Okay, fantastic. So does anybody else, other questions on the place-based? Yep, Craig, please come in.
Yeah, just one quick question, and it might be quite a simple answer and show me missing the point at previous briefings, but we've obviously incurred an extra cost with regards to employers' national insurance of roughly 1.4 million. I think from the budget of cafes, it wasn't 100% clear if that was going to be the final point or whether there was possibly room for that to be covered by central government or partly. I'm just wondering if we've reserved, we've come to the conclusion that we have been lumbered with that bill, or if there's any glimmer of hope that the government may fund it. Thank you.
Good question. So we were assured through the national budget that local authorities would be fully funded for national insurance. In the end, rather than looking at actuals, government distributed a pot using a formula. We consider ourselves to be 1.4 million short of that. At the moment, we've identified a mechanism basically reducing our contingency. So we are assuming that we, as a council, will have to meet that cost. This is for our staff. We're assuming as a council that we'll have to meet that cost, but we are ever hopeful that government will recognise this. It seems that we as a council were sort of slightly ahead of the recognition. There's a lot of, in the trade press, in the local government press, there's a lot of other councils sort of making this point as well now. So we're ever hopeful, but we've covered the risk if necessary.
Councillor Leary?
Sorry if it's not an appropriate question, but on page 67, in regards to I know we've already covered it, in regards to the introduction of evening car parking charges, just for information, does that include Tier 3 Tier 1 and all Tier 2 car parks? It doesn't say which car parks will be affected by that, and I can't find any other detail on it. I may have missed it.
So I like a nice, easy yes-no question. Is it all car parks or specific ones? Jack Wiltshire.
Thank you, Chair. Jack Wiltshire, Corporate Director for Highways and Engineering. Takes longer to say my title. The answer is yes. Yes, all car parks.
I have two, so I have Councillor Bryant coming next, and then back to Councillor Bear. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Chair. If I look at line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it says highways projects continuation of funding, page 64, which is 384,000. That was originally funded under capital. I'm assuming now that that has to be funded under revenue. If that's correct, that's amazingly close to the number we're giving away on car parking that you're going to have extra in your budget. I just thought I'd raise that point. I now want to turn, if I may, to page 66, because there's lots of areas on there. We did ask that somebody would be here to represent the Green Space team, because a lot of my questions are on the forecast budget improvements, in other words, the extra income that we're looking at. And if I look at revenue from, which is page 66, 1, 2, 3, 4 down, which is where Moores Valley starts, it'll become no surprise to anybody because it's my local area. Food and drink, we're expecting to get an extra 17,000 from that. I'm assuming that that is already dealt with, because if it's 17,000, the beginning of the new budget is looming very quickly with very little time to deal with it. Development to Moores Valley Railway offering at increased lease. Does that tell me we're putting their lease costs up? Moores Valley Golf and H&A income, 15,000. That's no surprise to me, because that could be a fantastic opportunity going forward for even more increased revenue. Enhanced retail offering, again, no surprise to me, because that's a shop that really makes us good money and has be careful how I say this, has a very good return on the investment. The one that concerns me slightly is Moores Valley Bike Hire. So at the moment, for those that don't know, we buy the bikes in and we rent them out, so all the revenue comes to the council. This looks as if we're going to discontinue that exercise, and I'd like some clarity on it, which means we won't be buying the bikes. We're going to get a third party in to run that operation for us. My concern is my experience of bike hire, which is Beryl, where they've just pulled out of my local area and left us with beautiful cycleways, but no bikes within the next couple of months. As I say, you might not be able to give me the answer today, but I will be looking for answers on some of those questions as to why we're looking at making these proposals. Does this come under you now, Gemma? I do apologise. We do have a representative that can answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. There was quite a lot in there, so I'll try and skip through that quite quickly. Food and drink offering at Moores Valley, that's the result of a reprocurement. So yes, that has taken place now, so we should be able to deliver that. The railway offering, the additional income generation there is mainly around increased food and drink sales at the station site. The golf, as you say, no great surprise there. Also, Dudsbury Golf Course has recently closed, so we've got an increased market share, and it's really successful, so we're confident with that saving. And in relation to the bikes, the team on site have done quite a lot of research around this, and the saving that they attributed that is based on experience in their research they've looked at with getting a third party in. So you're right, it wouldn't be Dorset Council run. They think there's savings to be there, but actually getting a third party to run that service.
Thank you, Gemma. Your normal professionalism, let me add. I'm going to ask a question as to whether we can have a conversation on the bike hire, because it is a concern to me. I have a philosophy in life: if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. Something that is working well, why change it and take a risk? We know what income we would get from the bikes. I'm just a little bit concerned. Perhaps we could have a conversation outside of this meeting. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm just people aware there's 3 people on the list. We've got Councillor Beer, myself, and then Craig. Derek, come on in.
Thanks, Chair. This is the welcome reduction in cost for the grounds maintenance budget. That's wonderful. And I obviously assume that some of that is because it's being dealt out to towns and parishes. I would worry a little bit. I represent an awful lot of volunteer groups right across Dorset and Wiltshire and Devon. And a greater dependence is put every week upon the volunteer sector carrying out work like that. If the dependence was upon more volunteer groups looking after their towns and parishes, that we might consider, and this is almost stupid to ask, I know the answer is no, but supporting those groups in a greater way to carry out the functions that they do, because obviously our countryside rangers are shrinking in number, and the demands on looking after our environment are growing week by week. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question fully. Sorry, because so are we saying that there is a reduction in the costs? Is there a reduction of service to go along with it that's being picked up by the third sector? Is that, yeah, I want to make sure I understand as well. So is there a reduction of any services? I've got 2 people signalling. Is it yourself or Jan? Gemma. Excellent. Thank you, Gemma.
It's about not a reduction in service. It's about looking at the contracts we currently deliver and making it more of a cost-neutral service. So that 154 is, what we actually spend at the moment. But actually, if we were to be cost-neutral, so it's about looking at some of the contracts we do that are less efficient and stepping away from those and sort of efficiency savings within our contract management rather than actually an impact on the voluntary sector.
Thank you. So just to clarify, there won't be any drop in service from the Green Space team. It's just looking at doing it different ways and maybe changing what contracts we choose to do. Super. Thank you. Just going to double check. Sorry, so I've got a question on a very small amount of the budget, but it piques my interest as something I don't quite understand how it works. So on page 65, we're stopping payment to reserves for Dorchester Sports Centre for their 3G pitch. So if we're stopping payment to the reserves, that implies to me that we have previously paid into reserves towards this. So my first question is, what happens to that reserves that we had previously accumulated towards that? Following on from that, the description now is it'll be replaced by capital bid in 2029. Obviously, a bid isn't guaranteed. So does this mean that we might stop paying to the reserves and they might not then be successful in the bid? That's my reading of it. Is that the case? And I do know it's only 25,000, but it just piques my interest.
Chair, we're looking across the room to decide who best to pick that up. We have made a certain amount of allocation contribution to reserves for the eventual replacement of that 3G pitch, but the proposition is exactly as you've described, that we should cease making a contribution to reserves and then ask for an allocation of some capital to top up that which we've already saved when it comes time to replace the pitch in 2029.
Thank you. So my follow on from that is, if we are still ring fencing the amount that we have put, I say ring fences might be the right word, we have saved so much already towards that replacement, we're now doing it as a capital bid, not a capital guarantee. So what happens if we say no to the bid?
The capital bid would be for the gap between that which we have saved and that which would be required. So we're not sort of abandoning that which has already been saved. But you're absolutely right. There will come a point where that would come in front of Cabinet as a recommendation in presumably a capital programme report for a relatively small amount of money. But it would nevertheless be subject to members' approval at that point in time. And if that approval were not forthcoming, then we would continue to maintain the existing pitch as long as we reasonably could.
Thank you. And I think this is what I thought was the case and what I wanted to kind of draw out from it, because that, to me, seems like we had decided we would replace something, and now we're saying we might not. And is that anywhere else that we need to be aware of? And what's the governance around changing the decision from we will be replacing to actually we might not replace? Where's that governance and who signs it off?
As a capital programme decision, that governance would rest with Cabinet. And I'm afraid what you're describing is the consequences of pressure on budgets. There's many an area in the police budget where I would like to put aside a little bit of revenue every year to build up a fund to definitely do things. But in times of increasing budget pressure, we get caught between the immediacy of things we need to do this year and the impossibility of saving up for things that we would like to do in the longer term. So in other circumstances, I'd be very happy to continue putting money aside to save up a fund. But in the circumstances the council faces with the pressure on its budgets, we're just not able to do that anymore.
Thank you. And just to make sure I fully understand, because I think I now understand what's happening there. So the decision to build that up previously in order to, in theory, replace, when I say, was more of a service-based decision rather than a previous decision that had been put in and is now being changed. Is that the case?
Yeah, I've no doubt that at some point that decision went through a budget process and before members, but I would probably describe it as essentially a service/operational decision to build up that fund, yes.
Thank you. No, that's what I wanted to make sure, so I understand what's happening there. No, I have somebody else before you. I do apologise. Was it Councillor Beer? Put his hand up again. I've done yours. I've missed someone. Thank you. Sorry, Craig. Please come on in.
It's because I'm new to this committee, isn't it, Chair? Just a quick question with regards to the reduction of Department of Education central government funding of 288,000. How does that possibly impact our ability to maintain those services? What does that look like? I'd be interested to know, please.
That's going to Jan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to address the question. Could you please just tell me which page it's on so I may scroll to the words? Where exactly are you looking? Thank you.
It's page 64. And if you, I'm not going to count down because I'll be here forever, but it's just in line with the P of pages.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So in the past, the council have benefited from effectively a grant from the Department for Education for the running of leisure facilities that are on education sites. And what's happening around the country, not just in Dorset, is that the DfE are moving to a position where they will fund those sport and leisure activities that are part of the national curriculum, but they won't put funding to councils for sports and leisure facilities on education sites that don't meet national curriculum requirements. And the new recently elected government is continuing that policy from the previous government. So each year we are getting successively less and less grant from DfE to run those leisure facilities that we have on joint use sites with schools. And the funding of this as a pressure is to put council money in to replace the reducing amount of funding that we're getting from DfE in order to sustain those services.
Thank you for the answer, and that's really useful. I think I'm probably going to be going into the realms of more of a political point, but I guess I'll ask the question anyway. What's the council's position on funding those services going forward? Is that something we're going to try and maintain as a council, or will it naturally and sadly lead to loss of provision for residents?
Yeah, I mean, if perhaps refer back to a recent but not the latest cabinet meeting where the leader made some commitments to a review of the council's strategy for built leisure facilities. That work is underway and will come forward and talk about the future of built leisure facilities and will be dealt with through that mechanism.
Thank you. So Councillor Brenton and then yourself, Ray, afterwards? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I ought to say Councillor Brenton, Litchett and Upton Ward. Now, I might have missed it because I often do. But we have a commitment, allegedly, which has been discussed, to devolve some services out to parish and town councils. Where does that fit? Where does that fit into this? Has anybody thought about what we might save by devolving out, particularly grounds maintenance and street cleaning, verge maintenance, all that sort of stuff, which we are encouraging, or we say we're encouraging parish and town councils to take on? Do we see that as a cost or a savings? And where would it be in the budget?
I'm going to take a stab in the dark and say that comes into our future council, because no papers have come forward with the devolution of any services yet. However, are there some devolutions of services hidden away in here we don't know about, or with budgets to go with them? Jan?
There are, for example, in the grounds maintenance budget that Gemma referred to, elements of, I wouldn't say devolution, but the work we do in partnership with town and parish councils. There's also elements of it reflected in property and asset budgets, but it doesn't really come together as a single line, which is why you don't see it quite as clearly as the question asks for it to be presented. But a lot of the service change in place, a lot of the way we look at services and try to look at how we do things most efficiently, one of the questions we always ask is, can one or other of our partners do this either better or cheaper or quicker than we can?
Thank you. Although Gemma did say there wouldn't be any cut of service at all. So I don't quite understand how we could not have a cut of service but also devolve down the power of doing the service. Can you just quickly...
If one of our parish councils, for example, perhaps some distance from one of our depots, has a relatively small amount of grass cutting that we need to do, if that local parish council can do that work with their own grass cutting equipment and their own grounds maintenance operative, rather than us putting a cutting machine on a trailer and driving it out to that location and unloading it and cutting it and reloading it and taking back, there's no diminishment in the service. The grass still gets cut, but it gets done more efficiently, for example. And I use the example to illustrate the wider point.
Because we pay them to do it?
Yes, in that instance, if it was a piece of our grass, then we would fund that as the option. Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. That's what I'm looking for. Happy with that, Councillor Benton? Happier with it? Yeah. Councillor Bryan, and then did I see Councillor Cook's hand up? Yeah, Councillor Bryan next.
Yeah, there's a few items I want to discuss on another page, but I need to get some clarity from Councillor Andrews, if he would, because when we were talking about the car parking, you said that was a cabinet decision. Is it a cabinet decision or a cabinet proposal?
Yeah, I think it's a cabinet decision once cabinet decided. It's currently a proposal that hasn't gone through cabinet yet.
Okay, that's right. Thank you, Chair. Gemma, I'm coming back to you now. £175,000 for garden waste. Page 66. It's there's two lines. One is stretched income target for trade waste, and the other is stretched income target for garden waste. Jonathan, do I need to declare an interest in this because I actually use the garden waste services?
Thank you, Jonathan, Mayor Monitoring Officer. Now, just to be clear for anyone who's watching, I think that one was fairly flippant, but just to be clear, I've always said that councillors, like anyone else signing up to the garden waste service, it's so small that the law takes no notice of it, and you don't need to declare that you are a user of the garden waste service, which I am as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. I wasn't being flippant, I promise you. Yeah, you get very twitchy in public service now as to where the dividing lines are between things. That's an ambitious increase in money because when I compare our garden waste charges against other areas, we're at the top end of the scale. And I know garden waste is good for you because we get revenue back on it. as well as providing the service. But it does worry me a little bit, but I'm sure you've gone through this with a fine-tooth comb, so I'm going to leave it alone. I'm more interested in negotiate new price for food waste. Are we already, previous question that I asked you before, have we already done this? Because obviously the budget starts in a few months' time, subject to full council approval. So I'm assuming that all the things you put forward, we've already negotiated the agreements.
Yeah, the food waste contract has been negotiated and signed.
Right. I'm going to move on to a planning issue, if I may. Something that got raised yesterday, I was quite interested in, and I'm sure Aidan gave a very good answer on it. Obviously, developer contributions for SIL and everything else, that money must be stored somewhere. Who gets the interest? Is it planning?
Thanks. So same answer as yesterday, yes. It gets put against the bottom line of the council, and then funding is allocated accordingly. So it doesn't necessarily sit in the planning space. We try and operate our overall finances as a single council.
Gemma, I'm coming back to you. In your budget, we're seeing a tremendous increase in the amount of fly tipping that's going on, especially over in the east. And I don't understand why, because we have a very good HRC, only a little way away from where the fly tipping is happening. I'm assuming you've got money in the budget for fly tipping and litter picks, because the litter pick at the moment, certainly over in the east, hasn't happened for a long time. And I can remember joining Karen Punchard on her team, walking on the A31, picking up bits of rubbish from the A31. But we are going to need some litter picks, because elsewhere in these numbers, I'm now trying to find it quickly, there is a mention about street cleaning. If we've suffered with anything in the last few years, it's the fact that street cleaning has reduced, and it's something that most members will have their residents talking to them about. But as well as street cleaning, and this is probably Jack's issue, I don't see anything in there to improve the drainage systems that we have at the moment that are fairly cluttered. If you want to come back to me on those outside the meeting, I'm happy to take those outside the meeting. Let's get an answer on that first.
Yeah, I've got a couple of people working. I'm trying to make sure I understand the question fully. So are you looking for the budget line that we can't see a budget line on for litter picking and removal of fly tipping, and we're looking for assurance that isn't, that it's not that it's been removed, it's that it's not a pressure or an income for this year? Is that the case? I've got a few people signaling to answer. I've got three of you signaling to answer. Who wants to take it? I've got John, Jan, and Gemma will take it. Fantastic. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. On the place pressures, you'll see that there is a street cleansing pressure of 350k, and that is a budget realignment from funding that was taken out from this financial year. So that is going back in for next year in recognition of the fact that we need to continue to provide those services. Fly tipping isn't specifically mentioned because that's part of the overall street cleansing budget.
So fly tipping and litter picks are part of the street cleansing budget, and that's been rebalanced to be back to 350, what it actually costs us. Fantastic. Great answer. I have a couple of people, I've got a number of people waiting to speak, and I've got four. And going to the order I have is Councillor Took, Councillor Pear, name's gone. Sorry, Robinson? No. Williams, thank you so much, and then Mercer. Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. Really just to go back to this devolution down to parishes and towns. Yeah, it's true that parishes could cut their own lawns and sweep their own streets. Generally requires equipment which they don't have. So the solution is they contract out to somebody else, or they contract to Dorset Council to do it, I don't see any benefit to the parishes in doing this. It's going to be a cost to them that part of the statutory responsibilities of the Dorset Council is to keep the place clean and tidy. So I think we need to be very careful about saying to parishes, oh, you guys can pick this up because your precept is uncapped, whereas ours is. And all that does is transfer costs down from Dorset Council to the parish council. Changes nothing as far as the actual council taxpayer is concerned. And indeed, if contractor services are more expensive, it might send them up. So I'm not impressed with that as a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be clear, that's not what they're saying at all. What they were saying is that when a town council or a parish council wishes to do it because they can do it cheaper and more effectively, they can then say to us, you give us X amount of money and we can do it for you. And I know that has occurred in Blandford. I think there's something we've done with that. It's happened in Sherborne as well. And so that's when we pass the money down. We don't just tell them they have to do it. That's not what we currently do. I guess that might come forward as a devolution thing later, but that's not what's on the table here and not what we currently do. So rest assured, they have to be a willing partner and choice in that relationship. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Beer next.
Spot the pun. We need to grow the garden waste budget revenue. What we have found over the past year that last year, for some reason, so many potential customers who wanted to be part of that scheme were turned away because it couldn't be fitted in. I would hope that officers, and I don't mean to be unkind, have enabled people to join the scheme and make the most of it, both environmentally and indeed to help the budget along and improve the revenue. Something was really wrong last year, so hopefully we can make it better this year.
Thank you. So we're looking for assurance that we are increasing, maximising the capacity to enable us to make more value on that. I'm getting nods. Do you want to comment or just happy with yes, that is what we're doing? Yep, that is what we're doing. Councillor Beer, excellent. How? Sure. Would you like to say how?
So every year in January, we rebalance the garden waste round. So obviously every year we have new customers and those customers will be in random pockets throughout the county. So in order to make the service efficient, we have to rebalance the collection rounds through route optimisation. So we do that every year and that's how we absorb the additional growth of customers. The only areas that we struggle with are some of the narrow access areas where financially it's not as viable for us to provide that service. And so sometimes we have to wait in some of those areas to have more customers in order for them to be able to come on board because we can't operate a service at a loss.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, we have Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Nock. Councillor Sarah Williams, Bridport. Just looking at page 65, the about 6 one down, alternative delivery model for tourism services. Has this already been developed or is this going to be developed?
That's a great question. I haven't seen the agreed thing, so I assume it's to be developed, but we'll ask. Jan.
Yes, indeed, it is to be developed, and we're looking at models where we talk more frequently to the tourism sector, understand better what they want from a tourism service and move to a position where actually it becomes a subscription model. So we're charging more of what we do to businesses that want to engage with the services that we provide. There is a little bit of risk in this line in that an as yet undeveloped proposition needs to come good quite quickly to meet the budget target, but we're following a model that is well used and well versed elsewhere in the country. We're not making up something that others haven't done very successfully elsewhere. So while there is a small amount of risk, it's not excessive in the overall budget sense.
Fantastic. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Jan, can I compliment you on your savings because they're very granular and they're not large round numbers and they're more credible. I'm a nosy individual and if I see somebody contracting with Dorset Council, I often go and look at them on Companies House. There are 2 businesses I've been involved in. One was an SEN school and one was a waste business. I won't tell you what they were, but these were very profitable businesses which profited from doing business with Dorset Council. Have we explored as far as we can joint ventures or profit sharing arrangements with businesses like that? Because of the power of our spend, you know, if we were to move that contract elsewhere, some businesses may well catch cold. And when I put together my 10-point plan of the transformation plan, which I shared a few of them with Aidan, the one I didn't share with him was a freeze on executive pay. Maybe I need to come back to that one. But have we explored joint ventures and profit sharing as much as we could or can?
If I may, I'll answer your question in two parts, because the first part is to say, Gemma gave a moment ago an example about the food waste contract, where continuing to use an existing contractor, we've reduced the cost of the service by the cost to us of that contractor of over £300,000. So in a simple, straightforward contracting environment, even though that may well be a very profitable company, we are negotiating to get the best deal for Dorset. Using joint venture and partnership arrangements with companies is very viable, and there's plenty of councils that do it. But you still have to go through competitive tendering requirements to meet procurement legislation, and it does make it somewhat more complicated. So where we can use a straightforward competitive tendering process and a simple contract, I think that is generally our preferred route. Where we talk more often about joint venture investment is where we're talking about regeneration and development, rather than more like frontline service delivery. Although that said, highways, with a very well-developed partnership with Heidelberg, thank you, is an example where we procured a long-term partnership, which has been very beneficial to the council in terms of not just the price for the work that they do, but the ability to expand and contract our capacity as a council by using the facility provided by that contract. So we have lots of different models, some of which are more partnership, some of which are straightforward contract. But in that space, it's so dynamic and the market's changed so quickly that it's always worth continuing to look again at what we're doing.
Thank you, Jan. I think Aidan wants to come in on that as well, so I'll call Aidan in.
Thank you. If I could just make a marker, really, about commercial thinking as a council. This is something that the previous scrutiny committee was very interested in, and you may wish to explore in the future as well. I think the last two conversations have been really helpful and illustrative of what does a commercially minded council look like. We've been given an example with waste of a service where it's not commercially viable for us to deliver in all areas, and therefore took a commercial decision not to do it for a particular time. So that's a difficult decision, isn't it? So there's one example of commercial. Joint venture, we have set one up in the last year for setting up a joint venture with Kent County Council to provide our own agency workforce. So Connect to Dorset. So it's been trading about a year. An example of a public joint venture where we've been able to use their expertise to accelerate what we do. So clearly, as Jan described, there are all sorts of different other joint venture models, but we do try and look at each case on its merits and try and have that commercial mindset. But it might be something you may wish to explore later in your future programme, Chair.
Thanks, Aidan. Although I think setting up any new stuff like that would be overview. That's looking forward rather than looking backwards. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. On page 65, second from the bottom, changes in catering operating model at Verwood Hub. Lovely. In order to make changes in operating models in terms of stock control and waste, you normally need something a little bit extra in terms of your point of sale systems, the way it links in with stock control, stock management. And again, I come back to the point I made earlier. There's an investment in software normally required. Is that necessary here? Do we need to do something with the point of sale and stock control systems? Have we done it? And if we have had to do that, has the cost involved been taken into account how has it been taken into account with this £50,000 saving?
Fantastic. So to make, again, sorry, I couldn't quite hear everything, so the movement. To make sure I understood, the question is, with that particular example, is that inclusive of all the costs to do it or not inclusive of the cost to do it, I think was the question.
That's right. And it's all of these things, you've got to invest to make savings. So we're looking at 50,000 savings. Is that net or gross? Simple.
That makes sense. Jan.
Thank you, Chair. There is no significant investment cost required to do this. And as Councillor Bryan mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of expertise in exactly this sort of operation elsewhere, and I'm thinking particularly of Moores Valley Country Park. So it's more about the application of what we've learnt in one place to another place than it is about going out and finding lots of new investment to do something new.
Sorry, so is it net or gross?
It's a net figure because all budget figures are net, but the gross is not a great deal higher.
All net figures, but in this instance, the gross is much higher. Yeah, fantastic. Happy with that, Councillor Took?
Yes, it's great using knowledge we know, and it's great using systems we get. We might need to use more licensing, but that's fine, as long as it's a net figure.
Excellent. Any other questions on this appendix, or do we move to the final appendix? Okay, we're going to move to Appendix 1H on page 74. I will make a statement here beforehand. I am very uncomfortable with this appendix. We don't have anything to scrutinise for the appendix. Last year, we were in a similar position, and we were told there was 8.6 million of OFC savings, which we managed to achieve 0 of them. Not failed to meet it, we made 0, which in itself is very concerning to me. And that will be coming, as we'll be discussing in the agenda item or two's time, that coming to us to find out why that occurred. This year, we're being asked to sign off on 10 million, which is a very nice round number. Not sign off, sorry, we're asking to give our kind of belief in that £10 million of OFC savings. And we have not been enabled to see any of the detailed information, even privately when requested, and instead is not going to be released until Monday, conveniently just after this. I find it very hard to scrutinise anything that has nothing to scrutinise in it. What we have got is illustrative examples of how it could be split by head count, but it is just illustrative. Aidan was very clear with me, we're not just splitting it by head count because that wouldn't make sense. And so I'm not really sure what to talk about here myself. We will have the detail on Monday, but nothing is allowed to be given until then, as we were told. So I'm not really sure what to scrutinise here. Does anyone see that differently, that there is something we can scrutinise on this OFC? I have 2 people. I have Craig and then Mercer. I want to say Johnny Mercer. It's not Johnny Mercer. Steve. Thank you, Steve. And do you know what? The weird thing is, Steve, is one of my local guys and is in my shop regularly, and I still forget names. I'm awful. Craig, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, maybe some clarity. Cost of living fund, 500,000. Was that a different figure previously? I'm not sure what that is, sorry.
I believe 2 million, but it was 2 million, wasn't it? So should we want to comment on that, Aidan?
Yeah, thank you. So for this current year, we used or set aside 2 million from reserves. And then during the course of the year, the government released additional funding for the Household Support Fund. So during, I think it came to scrutiny, people and health scrutiny quite recently. So of the 2 million for this current financial year funded from reserves, we're spending 1.5 million this year. What this £500,000 in here is a £500,000 regular commitment to keep going with the cost of living for next year and recurrently as long as the budget is there.
Sorry. I'm sure it's my fault. So just to clarify, the overall figure is remaining at 2 million, but we're already funding 500,000, or it's now been reduced to 500,000? Sorry.
Sorry for not being clear. So, no. So for next year, there is 500,000, 500,000 in the budget for cost of living. That's the cost of living fund for next year.
And then I'm forgetting who was next. Steve, sorry, come on in, Steve.
Thank you, Nock. I'll wear a big badge next time. If I look at page 62, the corporate services savings, it's very explicit there. It talks about a lot of savings from vacancies. If I go to the last, to Appendix 1H, it talks about, forgive me, I hope I can find it. It talks about £4 million worth of savings from our future council. We're not double counting some of those, are we? Because that's what I thought was in those appendices.
Good question. So what we've been doing with these individual appendices as going through place and corporate is to identify and explore the savings that the directorates have generated, sort of in our sort of silos, as it were. The Our Future Council approach is looking across the organisation by working more effectively together, investing in technology. How does that release or reduce our need for workforce? And so there's further savings there. So we're very careful on the risk of double counting. So collectively, we're looking at about a 12.5 million pay bill reduction through a combination of these individual savings, including vacancies, including Our Future Council.
Thank you. I have three people wanting to come in now. I have Councillor Parry first, then Councillor Leary, and then Councillor Beer. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just return to the cost of living fund, because I recall this being hotly debated across the chamber with a range of views expressed between council groups over whether £1 million or £2 million was going to be a sufficient amount of money in order to fund it. The Liberal Democrat group who took on the majority administration of the council had set that at £2 million. Why is that suddenly miraculously returned to just a mere £500,000 being sufficient to meet the needs? That's a huge drop in changes. What's the justification for that? Because I haven't noticed my cost of living or anybody I know's cost of living reducing by 75% in the last 12 months.
Okay, so the growth in the cost of living has slowed down, but I appreciate that still life is more expensive than it once was. One of the factors is that the government has introduced or extended its household support fund during the course of this year. So our assessment of what we can do as a council in terms of investing and continuing to support residents through things like food banks, energy efficiency loans, and supporting our voluntary sector to support our residents. We sort of feel that within the pressures and the constraints of the budgets, £500,000 combined with what government is providing is the envelope that we can operate within.
So to clarify, it's being 500,000 this year, but we're not reducing any services as part of that. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you clarify? Not reducing any services to whom or?
Sorry, not reducing any of the offer that we gave with the £2 million last year, because obviously it's a quarter of that. We're happy, we're maintaining the same standard of offer.
So what the funding that's been used this year has been a series of grants and offering and funding to voluntary sector to employ staff to help with debt management and that sort of thing. So we will be providing less funding to the sector. So, but I can't say whether that's necessarily a service cut or not.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, I just want to get definite clarity on the household support fund. Yes or no answer, has it been cut? In terms of not in terms of completely, because obviously it hasn't, but has the amount of money actually been cut from last year?
to clarify that, household support or the cost of living fund? So the cost of living fund, it's 500 as opposed to 2 million, is that correct?
So 2 million came from reserves for this year. Next year, it's 500,000 and nothing from reserves.
Yeah, so has it been cut? Has the budget for that been cut?
I think that this is moving into a political question. The actual answer is that a capital budget was used of a budget from reserves of 2 million was put in last year. And if you remember, it's probably not a recurring budget line, so it was a one-off from reserves. So the budget technically has not been cut. However, the budget was 2 million, it's now 500,000, and the political conversation of that should sit for the main chamber and a cabinet, not for here. But it was a very good attempt. Councillor O'Leary, are we sure?
That's fine, I can't wait.
OK, thank you, Councillor O'Leary. I think that's fair. I do try to keep that as much as I can. Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Chairman. I really don't mind if you tell me this is not an appropriate question, because I hate to, as those who know me know, I hate to be inappropriate. But, yeah, quite. We've heard a lot about staffing and how important that the debate is, and how we do it all very, very carefully, and posts haven't been filled. I've just had a moral worry that we've taken on brilliantly apprentices, which is fantastic, and they come and join a wonderful organisation like this and think, yes, I've made a right decision, it's my future. But right or wrongly, I've got the impression that some of them are not offered the opportunity to stay, and I hope that we don't just look at that as cheap labour, and that we are actually inspiring young people to come to a good career and not just as a cheap option. Tell me it's a wrong question, but it's something that's bugged me for a few months.
A really valid, great question, not through the budget. So I think that will go elsewhere. And I think maybe a question to full council or cabinet on that would be really appropriate, but it's not budget related. I think that's fair enough. Can we have assurance that we are not just using apprentices instead of employing people? Yes, we are getting nods from the SLT. Okay, very happy with that. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Come on in, Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you very much. Pete Dickinson, Preston and Littlemore. Littlemore and Preston. On page 74, there's the council plan, £1 million additional requirements for the council plan. What are the additional requirements?
Peter. There we go. Council plan, is that going to be towards planning or which officer? Aidan, go for it.
If I make a start, so this is about when the council plan was approved by full council in December. In the covering report there, we identified a series of potential areas to invest in to support some of those council plan targets. So what we've done is we've set aside £1 million to as a fund to target particular activities within the council plan to link with the priorities, be it around housing or any other areas. So one of the things that this whole budget process is doing, as any organisation does, is trying to realign the organisation to meet the new priorities of the council as a new council. So broadly, the budget is flexing to do that, but we have set aside this £1 million specifically for initiatives. We haven't got an approved or detailed list of initiatives yet, but the council paper did detail some potential ones.
I think what I'm confused of there is I would have thought that the council plan would be central to what we do going forward, therefore baked into every budget in there. Why is this £1 million set aside separately to do projects that are in the council plan but not in the central council plan? I don't quite understand what the difference is between going forward and this extra budget.
So you're right, and I've tried to describe that this budget that we've got in front of us does represent what the council plan's ambitions, but there is a few areas where we just wanted to give a little bit of scope in the budget setting to have room for particular initiatives. And there were some of the suggestions were in the original, as I said, supporting document. So that ranges from investment in some of making our vehicles more climate friendly, if I could put it that way, through to investment in more of the community development activities, which really sort of form part of what we're trying to do as a council. So it's a £1 million wriggle room in the budget to fund specific initiatives that really align with the objectives of the council.
So that £1 million budget is a central budget, but who's it held under and who decides what it's used on? Because most of the budgets come under a scheme of delegation. What scheme of delegation does that budget come under?
So this one, it's held, you're right, it's held centrally, so effectively kind of notionally under my responsibility, but it's very much sort of a cabinet will be giving the steer on it as we go through.
So it's a £1 million pot that Cabinet can use to support the council plan going forward. That's correct, yes?
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. You did touch on something that I wanted to bring up in there, is obviously there used to be dedicated budget lines for the environment. I understand that there's, or at least I can't see, a single budget line dedicated for that now, aside from a very small staffing budget, which I believe is for just the core group. Can we explain, like, how are we going to monitor increase or drop in the overall spend on that?
When you say environment, do you mean climate change in particular? In which case, can I invite my colleague Steve Ford to respond on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Steve Ford. I'm the Corporate Director for Strategy, Performance and Sustainability. The way that the climate programme is funded, when on a budget line, can look a little bit opaque in the sense that the actual sort of core funding comes across as quite a relatively small number, but actually the way that the programme is funded now is through a mixture of sources, one of which is through business rates derived from renewable energy. There's also funds coming from the Shared Prosperity Fund. We've also levered in money through the Net Zero Pioneer Fund as well. And we're also bringing in now some fees and charges income as well. So although it looks like a relatively small budget line, the actual total programme budget now is £1,045,000, which is covering a range of different programmes that are driving both the decarbonisation of the council, where we're making really good progress, but also now giving us the additional capacity we need for more external work, working with partners, which I think is somewhere we've been really keen to develop as well. And it's also given us the capacity to look at areas such as adaptation, which is in line with the strategy that was signed off in the last year or so, and aligns with the council plan as well. So actually, from a relatively small base a couple of years ago, in the last couple of years, the capacity of that programme has gone up quite significantly.
Thank you, because I didn't really get that feeling, because obviously we did have £10 million capital over years, which is still happening, so there's still more going into that. And we obviously, if we're including all of the grant incomes and everything and the pots we tap into, then what we had like over 20 million previously with Salex and everything. So because it did appear that, because it's only on that staffing, that it's substantially dropped. So are we still actually investing our own money into it? And where is that recorded, and how do we quantify it on here?
So we are still investing our own money, and the business rates, which are classed as a reserve, but they are an income that is coming in, is underpinning the delivery of that climate programme now. So from where we were just a couple of years ago, we now have a substantially larger programme. So we've gone from sort of 1.5 FTEs working on the programmes 2 or 3 years ago to now 10 FTEs working on that programme. So there has been a substantial uptick in the capacity of that programme, which is enabling us to start to really drive the technical and programme level solutions that we need to work with. Sort of the Executive Director for Place is also giving some tremendous support in terms of some of the operational issues that we now need to do to accelerate the programme. There are also broader discussions as well around how the climate programme might link into that, to that sort of council plan priority funds as well, but that obviously has a different process to go through as well. So, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So I guess whilst not having separate lines on here, that will be, and I guess we'll get those numbers to see those trends at the appropriate scrutiny meeting when it comes as part of its review. Fantastic, thank you. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I ask my question, I was going to ask a question on a similar line, and I might be slightly unkind to the officer. I apologise in advance, but I always worry when we talk about budgets and we use words like opaque. And when we have a real priority within the council as one of the 4 priorities, I think it's really important that we have clarity around how money's being spent on the climate and nature emergency. So I really hope that going forward that does come through, because ultimately, leading on to my second question, this budget is obviously a really tough budget, and there's been some money added around the inflation fund, and it leads on to the question I asked earlier in the committee meeting around national insurance cost. I suppose it's almost an impossible question to answer, but are we satisfied right now that with the pressures on things like the national insurance increase, inflation, interest rates, and the volatility of what the world looks like right now, are we satisfied there's enough money to, and I'm looking at Councillor Clifford as well, to kind of cover those risks, or could this be something that we might need to look back? And I fully appreciate it's almost an impossible answer, but I'd love to see if you can give it a go.
And I'm aware that I may have been drawn to Councillor Clifford, but I'm sure you're asking Aidan about that for risk. Because of a political answer or an opposite answer, because political answers should really be at Cabinet and places. However, Councillor Clifford is happy to come in, so we will absolutely allow him.
I'll leave it to Aidan, but the answer is yes, but we are aware of the risks, and that's why we are increasing our contingency, but I'll leave it Aidan to give you the detail.
Thank you. So as your Section 151 officer, I have to do a Section 25 report, it's called. So that's a section towards the end of the Cabinet paper, which is currently in draft, where I have to form a professional view about the level of risk in the budget and whether we have set aside sufficient ways and means to manage that risk. And I sort of take my view based on kind of what I know of the numbers, but also the level of debate and the sense of the politics I get, as well as using advice of internal auditors as well. So I form a collective view, and then also triangulate what we do with many other local authorities around the country that we relate to. So the volatility that we've encountered in previous years around inflation, fortunately it seems to be coming down, stabilising a little. Pay award has been a big issue that caught us, had a difficult time last year, the year before. This year, actually, we put too much in the budget because the pay awards agreed nationally, put too much in the budget. So for next year, we've set aside 2%. That is a bit risky. I think there could be a chance that nationally it sort of comes out a bit higher. And then we've got the volatility around, in particular, our demand-led services, our need-led services of adults, children, and homeschool transport, which we spoke on earlier. So those are sort of the areas I look at. So our layers of defence, as it were, our financial defence. So we expect and require our budget holders to manage the best they can within their budget. And then if they can't do that, then we look to manage that at a directorate level. So one budget holder making an underspend to help another. If we can't do that, then we try and manage at a directorate level, in the sense that in this current situation, we've got myself, so corporate and place are trying to generate an underspend to offset the overspend. The next layer of mitigation is through the contingency, as Councillor Clifford said, and we've got in the budget papers, I think it's around about £12 million worth of contingency, so that's money in the budget that we haven't earmarked for. And then final line of defence is our reserves, our general fund reserves. So we've got a series of defence, but there are some significant risks, and I can't go through this meeting without mentioning the biggest risk of all, which is the high needs blocks, the special educational needs, where we've got this but which we spoke about at some length yesterday. It's all available on Catch Up. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Following on from that question in a similar way, I'm going to touch on OFC, our future council. So as most of you know, I'm a very black and white thinker. I have Asperger's, that's the way I am. We have no detail, so I cannot have any belief in it because I haven't seen it, I've got no idea what's in it. So assuming that the same happens this year as did happen last year, so on the previous record of zero saving, what's going to cover that? Because obviously that's separate to the contingency set aside for everything else. Will that be once more covered from reserves? And if so, how long do we have on those reserves, if you don't mind, Aidan?
Can I give a slightly lengthier answer rather than a yes-no on this one, to pick up Councillor Took's point from earlier as well around investment in technology?
You can absolutely talk about investment in technology as separately, but this was a question on assuming that it happens the same as last year, but we didn't save anything, that it will then carry on being zero. That 10 million, will that come from reserves? That's a yes or no. And then if it does, how long will they last us? That's the question.
So if we were to not achieve any of the savings, or in particular the Our Future Council savings, or overspend, then it does come from reserves. Yes, correct. We've used reserves this year, and we'll have to use our reserves. So we have a few years left on those reserves, but it does, of course, depend on the scale of the level of overspend. But if I can answer the slightly longer answer now. So Our Future Council, we've worked up a really large and detailed business case that will be published on Monday. You can't scrutinise it here clearly, but because we can't, so it's not available yet because it hasn't been finalised yet. It'll be published on Monday, considered by Cabinet, and there's every opportunity for it to be scrutinised once it's been published. It's not being held back for secretive reasons. It's because it's complex and we haven't finalised it yet. We're just putting to bed the final figures.
I'm going to push back on that. The fact it's coming out the next working day after the scrutiny meeting and was refused to have the draft even, which will be on its final stage being shared even in confidence, makes me think that I'm not quite happy with it's not secretive as the answer there, but that's fine. But I also don't think we should discuss or talk to a document that technically does not exist currently. Yeah, until it's published, we haven't seen it, we can't talk to it. And I think I think it's very clear that we can't talk about those, that's ifs and buts. I have a couple of hands up. I want to make sure that they are questions. Councillor Parry, then Councillor Mercer.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very conscious that you referred to a £12 million headroom that's been built into the budget, which, of course, one would expect to see. But one of the examples that we saw during this current financial year was, I think it was a £9 million budget headroom was used up, and an additional overspend was then occurred of some millions of pounds, which I think was a similar sort of figure of 9 million. At which point we then became aware through the scrutiny process of the extent of which the financial year was panning out. Do you think there's sufficient safeguards in your £12 million headroom for us to weather such a storm, and that we won't actually be dealing in the first quarter with a huge overspend, including the use of the headroom in the budget?
I'm going to call it off the mayor here, because when he waves at me, I think there might be something very important.
Sorry, Chairman, it wasn't on that point. It was on the earlier point that you'd made about the reason about our future council business case not being here in front of you. And I was particularly concerned as monitoring officer and on behalf of colleagues about the comment earlier when introducing the section where you referred to it being convenient that it wasn't here. And I think the obvious inference that people would draw from that is that officers are deliberately sitting on a business case that we've actually got ready and should be here in front of you. And just to be clear about the reason it's not here, I think the original intention had always been that business case would be ready in full to be considered by members at the earlier overview committee meeting. We know that PwC, their team, had very significant illness after Christmas, which delayed work that they were doing for us in supporting us in developing the business case. They put additional resource in. They couldn't have the business case in draft to us as soon as we'd wanted. So we have a draft document. We wouldn't put draft documents in front of you in a committee like this, or in the overview committee. And we will have it ready for Monday, and that report will be published. The confidential detail that sits behind that is confidential for people outside the council, but it will be available for you as councillors. And I know that when it comes to Cabinet, the way in which the leader runs those Cabinet meetings is very similar to the way that you run this meeting, and you allow, and that councillors who are not members of the Cabinet will have an opportunity to comment on that business case and to comment to the Cabinet about it. So I just didn't want people to be left with the obvious inference that your officers are deliberately sitting on a business case that we've got ready to go now and should be in front of you, because that is not the case.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm very reassured, I think, to hear that it wasn't, the officers haven't intentionally done so, because it does look that way and appear that way to me and feel that way to me. And I'm a little bit surprised, so I think I'm going to get it offline, because I was told emphatically that PwC were not producing a document for us, so they were helping us to produce our own document. But that's a nitty-gritty we'll take elsewhere. But I've received a lot of conflicting information from different people on it, and so that's where I have the honest belief that it is being withheld. Didn't mean to imply it was officers. I actually assumed it's political. But it's not here. We can't discuss it. There's no point going forward. It will happen then. So we'll move to the response to Councillor Parry's point. Would you like to re-summarise your point, Councillor Parry?
Thank you. So it's in respect of the use of the headroom in a budget being sufficient to see you through the first, I suppose really the first 2 quarters of any reporting period, rather than us finding out the headroom that's been used and then additional overspends which have to be covered by reserves taking place. The other thing I'd like to kind of point in your direction is, and you allow me a little bit of latitude on this, we have known for some time and some years, because it has been discussed, that the trickiest budget was likely to be not 25-26, but 26-27. And whatever we do in the coming 12 months has to position us well for that budget. Otherwise, of all those sections, 114 becomes the reality of the day.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. I just waited for you to respond. Sorry, Aidan. I assumed you would just go straight in on that one.
Thank you. So I won't. So I've described the various levels of risk management and mitigation that we've got in place. So I won't rehearse that. I think we set aside the contingency in anticipation and scale it in anticipation of trying to learn from experience. And I talk about demand for adults going up, demand for children going up, demand for homeschool transport. So if all of those were exceeded our predictions and our forecasts, then clearly that would put us under pressure, but that would be under exceptional times. So I circle back to it is a challenging budget. I did mention earlier that future years are going to be even harder, and this is sort of setting the scene for what's in the future. But I do believe, and you'll see that in my Section 25 report, that we've set aside enough contingency, our reserves are at a sufficient level, but as an organisation, we must deliver on both the savings and the transformation programme, because if we don't deliver, that's when we start to enter into the territory that a number of other councils are already in.
Councillor Mercer was next, I believe.
I'm going to ask the same question as you, not differently, and see if I get an answer. Financially, none of us like surprises, do we? None of us like expenditure coming up that we had not foreseen. We talked about this budget being very challenging, didn't we? At the start of the 25-26 budget period, what will our level of free reserves be? And also, with your 114 certificate in mind, Aidan, which is essentially an insolvency cash flow test, can a business meet its liabilities when they fall due? Could you give us a scenario when, in relation to deficits and reserves, when actually your concerns over the 114 situation would actually start to bite? It's that question that not asked, how long have we got? But I think people need to have a sense of realism so they understand. You said many, many years. I hope we have, and I hope it never happens. But that sounded... I'd like to understand where your optimism comes from.
Okay, thank you. So the reserves, we take a stock take at the end of the outturn at end of each financial year and publish that in our Q4 financial report. So at the end of March 2024, so 10 months ago, we had our reserves were a general fund reserve, so that's unring-fenced, we could spend on it on what we need, of 37.7 million. And then earmarked reserves, in addition to that, of 122 million. So those earmarked reserves are earmarked for specific things ranging from government has given us money that we can only spend on specific items through to we've decided to set a reserve up to cover a particular risk or particular item. So at the end of March 2024, that comes to around about £158 million against a turnover then of I think it's around about 350 million. So that was last year. So during the course of this year, we've used some reserves, and they've been detailed in a paper. Forecast at 13 or so million over. And then when we publish the Cabinet Papers on Monday, we'll see that forecast overspend has reduced. So so we need to fund that overspend. And then we've got other reserves that we've used during the course of the year. So I think our assessment that we published, when did we publish this? Yeah, so we took our assessment to the November Cabinet meeting of our reserves for this financial year. And sorry, this is not screen sensitive, is it? So our general fund and earmark reserves will be just around about the £97 million mark by the end of this financial year. So this year during the course of this year, we have had exceptional expenditure going through, in particular some specific things, as I said, that government requested that we fund, and the level of overspend. So starting the year, next financial year, with around about £100 million worth of reserves, and we've talked about the scale of the risk of some of the overspend, so you can get a sense of the quantification there. The big risk remains the high needs block overspend, because if essentially the accounting rules are changed by government, then on the 31st of March 2026, suddenly we have to account for an amount that's pretty much near that level of reserves, and that's when we're in really, really difficult territory. So you talk about the Section 114 notice. So if we were to ever get into that sort of situation, it wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I'd be sort of warning long in advance, and we'd be in conversations with government long in advance. The mechanism that many councils are already exploring at the moment, and have done previously, is what's called exceptional financial support, where government doesn't give money, but it enables effectively borrowing against the capital programme. So that would be the mechanism that we'd be exploring to avoid the Section 114 notice. So circling back round, we've got a series of risks. The scale of the high needs block is in the hands of government, and we'd have to respond to that. So in terms of this, my mantra of taking our hands in our destiny, this is why the transformation programme is so important, to reshape the council, reduce the costs of running it, and setting us up for the following many, many years. We need to make sure that we deliver on our transformation this coming year, because otherwise that's when we're into a difficult position.
Yes, you can.
Thank you for that, Aidan. Putting that high needs block aside, because that's not within our control or gift, is it? So it was 37 million and 122 million, and now it's a combined 97 million. On the assumption that you can't via any of those reserves across, i.e. you can't take the specific reserves and put them into the general reserve, at the start of, let me ask the question again, at the start of 25, what will that free reserve number be, i.e. what funds would be available for us to meet future deficits?
So one thing to highlight in this budget proposal in front of you is we are seeking to build up the reserves again. So we've got at least £3 million going into the reserves. So there's recognition that we've used our reserves, we need to start building them up again. So of the 97 million, our assessment is that it would have at least 22 million as being our general fund reserve that we can use for anything. But under extreme pressure, we would review in forensic detail the earmarked reserves and see what sort of flexibility we've got around those. But sorry, and the detail of this is in the November Cabinet paper, so I can sort of signpost all members to that if that would be helpful.
Are we going to start tying it up? Because I think we've actually scrutinised everything here. But Councillor Took, I'll let you come in, but I do have a point I want to make first. There was a statement from Jonathan about me inferring that perhaps that was withheld from me. And that's not the case, Jonathan said. I can now confirm it is the case. And it was shared to certain members this morning. But it was not shared to myself or other members of Scrutiny that I'm aware of. But it has been shared as the draft document. So I can only feel that that has been held back from Scrutiny, and I would like to state my great displeasure with that fact, and in the future would like to be included when we're asked to see copies of reports.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back. Simon Clifford, I'm the Councillor for Chickerell and also Cabinet Member for Finance. That you're incorrect. The business plan has not been shared. What has happened was a presentation from elements of the draft business plan have been shared with some of your colleagues as a courtesy and of cross-party working, but the draft business plan is still being worked on and will probably be worked on over the course of the weekend and will be published on Monday.
I think this is something maybe we'll take offline because I'm receiving counter information. So we'll discuss this offline if that's okay, because I'm very unhappy because we asked to see it many times. Councillor Took.
Thank you. Just a small point. You talked a few minutes ago about reallocating some reserves from earmarked into general if needed. We can't do that with all reserves. There's things like SIL reserves or SIL money has to go on certain infrastructure projects, as I'm aware, or as I believe. Is that the case? And what currently are we holding in terms of SIL monies?
Yeah. So there's the principle of earmarking. You're absolutely right. Some money that either comes from government or local developers can only be used for specific things, or otherwise we'll return it. other funds that we will set aside and ring fence or earmark taking a view. For example, our insurance reserves. So we set aside sufficient money to cover the risk of a fire at a depot, for example. So that's an area where we could explore whether we need to, we explore on an annual basis whether to increase it or decrease it. So there's a degree of flexibility, but some are absolutely sort of untouchable, as you describe. In terms of how much we've got in 106 and SIL, I don't think I can answer that offhand, but we can do that outside of the meeting, if I may.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions on the budget, or can we start to round out our recommendations, finishing off? Oh, yes, please, come on in.
Thank you, Nock. Councillor Neil, I think Egerton Ward. Just as I'm conscious I don't want to go on too long because I know you wanted to wrap up, but just in relation to the Our Future Council, I just wanted to add that I similarly feel a bit uncomfortable just on the premise that we're being asked to scrutinise the document. And then the presumption, if I was a layperson, the presumption I would make is that we would have scrutinised all the figures in the document. And actually, we're going to end up in a position where we say, well, no, we didn't actually scrutinise that one and that one. But my point doesn't actually relate to that. I just wanted to ask, apart from Our Future Council figures, the other major figures that are on that final page of 1H, page 74, both relate to the extended producer responsibility funding. Both nice round figures. I'm presuming that there are estimates in there, they're not known amounts, and I just wanted to get a degree of comfort really about how much we actually know about both the costs and the income in relation to the grant, and whether the grant is actually, that £7 million grant is actually a factor based on the 4 million additional costs. So just I wanted a bit of comfort really on how those figures have been come up with, because they're quite large figures.
Fantastic, thank you. Sean.
Hi, it's Sean Creamer, Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial. So the £7 million, sorry, Sean, £7 million grant funding is confirmed. So we had written confirmation a few days before Christmas as part of the just after local finance settlement, confirming those numbers. And in terms of the number higher up, that is at the moment we're kind of holding on to that as the new responsibilities come with possible burdens, and we're not 100% sure exactly what that's going to require us to do in terms of meeting that way. So we're holding on to some of the money essentially to fund the cost of the change, etc. Gemma may want to come in on more detail or correct me, but the question kind of, as the question went on, it moved away from finance to operational. So
So Neil, did you want any more detail on it, or are you happy with that?
I'm pretty happy, really. I just wanted to get a sense of how much work had gone into them. I'm more happy on the 7 million, that's not a factor of the 4. And actually, that's a confirmed amount, so I'm pretty comfortable on that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So anyone else have any comments or anything you want to scrutinise in the budget? So the recommendations, we've had a couple pulled out already. Anthony, have you carefully made notes of the ones we pulled out earlier to remind me, because my brain starts to melt after a few hours?
I had one around the nuance for overnight charging, the HRC, and again, a bit more nuance around that and consideration for residents across borders. And those were the two that came through from 1F. And then there were no specific other recommendations, a lot of...
Thank you. So I think that's jogged my memory perfectly. So from 1D on housing, we would like, and it's been already agreed that for Cabinet, we will have the separate actual line showing that 40% commitment of what it can be spent on, will be in, which we're asking for that to be in there. And then you're right, Appendix 1E, there was no comments. Appendix 1F, we have the suggestion and the request that overnight parking is re-looked at in will it cost us more through loss of economy and other places to what it brings in. I believe that was kind of the discussion there. We also asked for them to look again at the trial, extending the trial car parking, but understand that's a political decision, so that will be decided politically, not through officer delegation. We've also noted, and I would hope I get support noted, that we cannot comment on OFC as the reports were not provided to us even after requested. I think that is factually true. I'm looking to see if Jonathan's going to wag his finger and say no, but I believe that is factually true.
You do not have the reports, Chairman. My concern was simply about the reason why you didn't have them, which wasn't because we were sitting on a finished product.
No, because someone chose to share the draft with others, but not us, and that's fine. And shared draft, not final draft. Are there any other recommendations people would like to have included that I think that I have missed? No? Yes, Councillor Took.
Sorry, Nock, it's not a recommendation so much, but we've talked within the council chamber and at various committee meetings about the council being a provider of affordable housing. Now, there are a number of things that are embedded within that option, whether we have a housing revenue account, whether we build our own, lots of political things in there as well. But whatever we do, there would normally be some costs attached, I would think, and I've not seen anything that might relate to the costs of us in some way becoming our own registered provider, building up a stock of houses, which may well not be a budget implication. It may simply be capital loans and then repayments and revenue from rents. But I'd just like some consideration of that to be at least raised in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, David. But I think that is what's being included in that first of the recommendations from 1D, because there was a amount kept separate, ring-fenced for that very purpose, as is defined by the resolution of it, and that we've had assurance from Aidan that that will be drawn out, ready for going to Cabinet to then be discussed. Yes? Yeah, and Aidan's nodding. Is that okay? Yeah, because that is that part. So I will ask, because we are taking the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I would ask your committee to consider putting a recommendation for is the necessary funding in order to deliver the local plan under the statutory guidelines and timelines that we have. I don't think that's necessarily been discussed in full at this committee. It's been touched on in other committees, I know, but I don't think a resolution as such or a recommendation to Cabinet has come from any of the committees to date. Perhaps the portfolio holder could confirm the position regarding finance and the delivery of the local plan.
Absolutely, I didn't see a single line as a pressure or a savings. That's fair enough. Shane, do you want to come in and talk about that? Briefly reassure us or not reassure us? If you need us to put a recommendation in saying we need more money for it, I guess that's something we can do.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, there is the possibility we might need a slight additional funding for the local plan statutory requirement. We need to get it over the line by December 26. Our problem is all members and officers are aware that the government housing numbers that they're now requesting from us means that we will have to go out and call for new development sites because we haven't got sufficient within our plans that stands at the moment. So there is the potential requirement for a slight amount of additional funding to it. Thank you.
So how do we feel about having another recommendation that we ask Cabinet to consider the risk of the increased cost for creating the local plan? Is that something happy to put in? Yeah, are you happy to add that, Anthony? Fantastic. And Craig, please come in.
Sorry, Chair. I think I may be on the same page as Councillor Took, or he may have confused me, but just for clarity, with the recommendation around the allocate the 40% funding, it was from my memory that was 40% allocation of funding to support housing within the council, but in more basic terms, council housing. Are we saying that we're seeking a recommendation that money be used to build council housing, or is it wider than that? I've seen my colleague nodding, so I think I'm on the same page, not confused.
That is absolutely not a recommendation would be within our remit to make. At this point, that's not for us. However, that 40% was very clearly specified what it had to be used for, and it was in support of new build, on-site, affordable housing, and to be available for match funding for government grants to spot purchase properties as required for temporary accommodation. It's very clearly about paying for built houses. or building them. And so I assume that the costs will come out of there. But as we said, Aidan's going to expand on that for Cabinet, but that's what the actual minutes kind of say. There is more nuance of it, and it's in there. Councillor Took.
Just a small point. Temporary housing is great, and we need it, but we also need permanent housing. Yeah? No, but the point was what we're doing at the moment is an awful lot of work on providing temporary housing. We don't appear to be doing a great deal on providing permanent housing, permanent affordable housing. And there was a...
That's not a budget-related item. If you want to talk about the efficacy of building houses or not building houses, that is not a discussion that's on this agenda. And that's something that, if it's a new thing happening, would go through overview. So I suggest that you talk to the chairman of your overview to talk about. We're not going to discuss building houses. For... Oh, okay. So there's a new housing strategy paper coming forward in the future. We haven't seen it yet. When it's published, it'll be published, and that will go through the normal process, but it's not for our committee to discuss or make a recommendation on. So if everybody's happy, Councillor Bryant?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On the item of, we talked about planning and the importance of planning for our future. That's what most of the residents talk about. But I would like to add, it's not just the local plan that's important, it's the local transport plan as well, because it's no good building lots of houses where there's no roads, and we need to make sure that those two fit closely together. So on our recommendation...
we can't recommend that sort of thing. It's nothing to do with us. We've put in recommendation that they take account of the increased cost of going out to tender for information on the Dorset plan. That's budgetary. It has to be budgetary for us to recommend it, and I don't think that is, unless you can find a way to shoehorn. Yeah?
Yeah, there is a budgetary cost that goes with the local transport plan as well, so I don't see why it can't be included.
I will go back to the member. Do we have a budget included for the local transport plan, Jan?
It's part of the revenue cost of highways department and travel and transport. So no, we don't have a specific budget line for it. I expect there is a budget line they book to, but so we can encompass the cost, but no, we don't.
So we have a proposal to create a budget line for the local transport plan to go alongside the local plan. We could ask Cabinet to consider doing that. Is that something we'd like to ask them to consider having a budget line for it? Yeah. Excellent. Aidan.
Will you be making any suggestions of how we could fund it as well? The budget's balanced at the moment.
Would we like to make a suggestion of that? I believe, Aidan, the idea is the local transport plan already is funded within the revenue. I think the thing is to bring out a separate line to include it, obviously, was the suggestion. And that seems to be getting affirmation. People are agreeing to it. So that will go forward. Councillor Parry?
I was going to say, if he's looking for the option for funding it from this committee, perhaps a realisation of asset disposal and the conversion to revenue is the avenue for that. But I appreciate that comes with associated legal costs, and it sounds simple in practice. I know from experience it's rather more difficult to achieve, but I would suggest looking in that direction.
Absolutely. Before we get any more political, where we should be making money or not, and I won't mention the fact we didn't save the 8.6 million we said we would at all, we will move on from there, unless anyone else wants to add another recommendation. Are we happy to take the recommendations on block, or would anyone like us to vote on them separately? Sorry? A hand? No, if they're online, I can't hear what they say, so they can't ask questions. We're very clear on that. Because I'm deaf, unless someone's in the room, you can't hear a word they say when they're online. Sadly, as much as it'd be nice, we need better accessibility for everything in that way. Anyone want to insist we take these votes separately, or can we just take all the recommendations on block? Does anyone need to have them repeated for them? Anyone dissent, or can we just accept them? Yep. We have accepted those recommendations on block. Thank you so much. A lot of people will now start shuffling out of the room. We will now move to item 7, although there isn't much left. I reckon we'll be done in the next few minutes if everyone's happy with that. We are reviewing the draft work programme for 2025. We have a couple of requests. One of those that was brought up elsewhere and has gone onto our plan is that we have a retrospective analysis of our future council 2024 and learning we can take from that, because obviously what we expected or what we were told has not occurred. And I believe Anthony has already put that onto our forward programme. Is that correct, Anthony?
Not yet.
Sorry.
It's for you to raise.
Sorry. Are you happy to?
Yeah.
Excellent. We also have Beryl Bikes. So we have a situation, it is public, isn't it? Yeah, it is public. Fantastic. Beryl Bikes are choosing to stop their contract at the time they are allowed to choose that. And it is leaving us with some quandaries. Do we want to have a look at kind of what happened there, the commissioning of it, the agreements, because quite a lot of infrastructure was put in? Yeah, I'm getting nods from that. Are we happy to put that forward in a couple of, probably 3 months' time? Are you happy with that, Anthony? Does that kind of fit into our plan? Absolutely. Yeah, happy with that. So we have those. We're going to be asked, apparently, to take a role in monitoring of the delivery of our future council in the future. Once that has been discussed and we're asked to do so, then I guess that will come to us to decide. I can't see why we wouldn't monitor it. Does anyone else have anything they wish to try to add to the future plan? Excellent. So we'll move to item 8, executive arrangements and forward plans. Would anyone like to comment on anything on there, or do we note them? Noted. Item 9, urgent business. There are no urgent items that I've been made aware of. Item 10, exempt business. There are none. Guys, thank you so much. 2 hours, 41 minutes. Well done all.